I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Brandi Simonsen. She is a professor with special education background. She's the co-director for the Center of Behavioral Education and Research. She's the co-director of the National Technical Assistance Center for Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. And we are so excited. I've used her. She's co-authored a lot of books. I have personally loved using her books, and if you ever need recommendations for any, we will gladly share. And we are so excited to have her here today with us. And I'm going to stop sharing so that she can share her screen with us.
Thank you for that intro and for letting me get started with sharing. Let me just set this up for 1 second. So I am thrilled to be with y'all, and I am going to end by 12:30. So if you notice me continuing to check my phone, it is for that purpose, not for being off task. And in 20 minutes, we are going to set you all up to start to have conversations about how to design effective classroom expectations or norms. And I recognize y'all already probably know a lot of this content. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is listen in the frame of thinking about how you're going to take this back to support others and ask questions from that perspective as well. Because in my experience, it is so much easier to know content and even be able to implement it individually. It's a lot harder to know content deeply enough that you can support others in their implementation and support a range of ways that they might choose to frame some of these critical features or implement these critical features. And as you all know, this work is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's contextually and culturally relevant. So we not only want you to feel comfortable with them kind of adapting, we want you to encourage them to make it contextually and culturally relevant for themselves as educators and for their students. So I'm going to try and keep chat open and keep watching. And if there are questions or areas where we should actually pause and have a conversation, I'm going to welcome folks from the Basque team to interrupt me and do that. But otherwise, I'm going to probably keep going and save a little time at the end for questions and answers and conversation. Okay. So with that, there's a couple of anchor resources that I think would be really helpful for you to be familiar with from our National Center. So I'm super biased, but this is one of my favorites. And this resource helps really frame the conversation around what it means to implement effective social, emotional, and behavioral support in a classroom context. If anyone outside of the immediate Basque team has peeked at it, you also know it's a lot. And so it's a hard thing for folks to start from at the beginning. So I think about it as a really good and free reference text. But the resource that I'm going to have us spend the most time on takes these kind of critical features and breaks them into an action planning document. And before I introduce that, I'm going to actually pop it into chat so you can find it quickly if you want to. I'm going to share with you, I think, some of the mistakes that I've seen us make as a national center that have kind of flowed into conversations down to classroom implementation. And so one of the mistakes I think comes from how we conceptualize or present what tier one looks like. And so we often start with a triangle that has 3 tiers, green, yellow, and red. And so one misrule is that tier one is only supporting the kids in a green. And as you all know, the green actually extends the full triangle. So tier one is intentionally designed to be supportive of each and every learner. So in a classroom, what that means is tier one is never one size fits all. Tier one, in and of itself, is robust and differentiated support that should be designed to meet the needs of each and every learner, knowing that there are some learners who need more than just tier one. So while it's designed to provide a strong foundation of support, there are some learners who will need targeted or tier two or intensive and individualized tier three supports to fully benefit from tier one. But it should be designed so that all learners can experience some level of success with tier one, which pushes us a little farther than I think we've sometimes landed as a field. So if you notice the framing for this in the title, it really is the idea of how we create a robust and differentiated foundation of social, emotional, behavioral support in the classroom. So how we do that is the resource I popped in. And we want to both recognize that that's a big thing I just said and make it actionable for folks to have a place to start to get toward that idea of a truly robust and differentiated foundation of support. So this little resource we are going to use to walk through this conversation today, and I just realized I lost my chat, so I'm popping it back open, I hope. There we go. We are going to use this resource to walk through today's conversation on purpose because it's a pretty easy resource to take back and train from. It's an easy resource to support a teacher during coaching opportunities. So it doesn't need to be the resource you all choose to use, but it is one that I found really helpful more recently. So what we're going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about is what it looks like and sounds like to do this work in a classroom context. And we're going to talk through some of the critical features. Again, this is the hyperlink that I already popped in chat, so you have it. We talked about some of the critical features already, but we're going to go deeper into what it means to create a safe environment, predictable routines, positive norms or expectations, explicit instruction in the academic and social, emotional, and behavioral skills within those routines. Think about ways that we're enhancing our culturally relevant and engaging instruction for learners, how we're setting people up for success with quick prompts, and how we're providing feedback to encourage growth and learning. So with that, I'm going to dive us in, and I hope the pacing is okay, but I'm going to keep going a little fast so we can get through all of it in 15 minutes. So first conversation is having teachers consider how they have designed their physical classroom environment. And I think this is something that sometimes goes in weird directions. So I don't know about y'all, but my Facebook feed or whatever social media feed you all look at around late August, maybe mid-August to early September is filled with pictures of people's classrooms. And so some folks get super artistic. There's like the Hogwarts. There's all these different kind of ways people think about designing their classrooms. And while that's pretty and cool, and I admire their skill set, what actually creates an effective environment doesn't require that level of artistic talent, right? We can think about core features of creating a safe space, physically safe space, as considering the furniture and how you're building traffic flow around the environment. And we can think about that in general, but we can also think about it in specific when we know who the learners are. So if we have kids who move around in chairs or have different mobility issues, they should be able to access every part of that classroom through effective classroom design. We have to think about how we're going to be able to monitor the spaces in the classroom. So if you're in a high school and there's a science lab and there's weird furniture structures, you have to be thoughtful about how, as a teacher, you can either change the physical environment or change your body and where you are in that space to be able to adequately and actively supervise. For some of us, we care very much about students getting into teacher materials or we want things designated. So if that's the case, we want to designate, prompt, and teach that. And we also want to be thoughtful about the seating arrangements, not that there's like a magical classroom design, but being thoughtful about how we're setting students up for the types of learning that we want them to engage in. So if we're wanting conversations, sitting them in rows and kind of columns is probably not our most effective way to facilitate conversation. If we want a different kind of learning, that might be appropriate. So being thoughtful with the seating arrangement. And again, I'm going to go fast, but you can think about these as kind of core features and then how they can be adapted to look different based on grade level, based on needs of students, based on educator preference. So there's not one right way to do these things. There's a range of ways that folks can do this that still hit these critical or core features. All right, so safe environment is kind of the starting place for the rest of the conversation. The next part is how we want kids to engage in that environment. So what are the predictable routines that we want to set students up for success with? And if your school has already done the school-wide matrix, and you can see it over here, we think about the matrix being a really useful way to document some of this at the classroom level. So the predictable routines that we ask teachers to think about are those things that kids are going to experience every day and or the places kids might have challenges. So thinking about how we set them up for success by being thoughtful about what those routines look like and sound like. And we will probably have a sense of this even before we meet our students. But once we meet our students and our families, we should be having these conversations collaboratively so they're helping us understand what the routines look like and sound like from their perspective to be successful. So as a starter, we're going to think about, of course, what we want students to do, but one of the hats I wear is training pre-service teachers. And we always ask them to actually start with themselves. Like, think about the important things that they want to accomplish by the end of the day and make sure that those are built into their own routine, including time outside of their time with students. For example, thinking about how they're going to make sure family connections happen. So if we just hope we're going to make a call or send an email or create a newsletter, it's probably not going to happen. If we have a designated time and a plan, it probably is. So having educators think about their routines that they can kind of plan and engage with would be really helpful. For students, we want them to understand from the moment they enter the space, how they're welcomed into the space and how they navigate it independently. So thinking about the key routines that we'd expect them to experience and thinking about from their perspective what their needs and wants are in the context of those routines. One of the most effective teachers that I've seen, you would not notice her managing, quote unquote, her classroom because she spent so much time developing and teaching routines to have her learners become independent that the routines manage their classroom, meaning the kids could independently navigate between activities. She happened to be an educator who worked with high school age students with really intensive, severe emotional behavioral needs. And so even in that context, this basic tier 1 strategy of having really predictable routines allowed her students to be successful. The other piece, as we know, is having downtime can sometimes be challenging, and transitions are often a time where we see behaviors spike because kids don't always know what's expected or how to navigate those successfully. And I use kids to mean a broad range of students, so thinking from early childhood up through transition ages. Those transitions can be really challenging. So being able to plan transitions, teach transition routines, and have them developed and established for students. So once we have routines, we can then think about what our positively stated expectations or norms look like in the context of those routines. And so this part of the activity looks a lot like what teachers would have done as part of a school-wide team, right? They've already had the experience of operationally defining what it looks like and sounds like to be respectful in the cafeteria or to be responsible in the hallway, whatever the norms or expectations are that they've selected. The challenge here is to get the teachers in collaboration with their students and with feedback and input from families to really think about what it looks like to engage in a cooperative learning group or in centers if you're in an elementary school classroom or in a debate if you're in a high school classroom, right? So whatever the routines are that are relevant for your context, getting to the level of what it looks like and sounds like so that in the matrix, we can then get to where there are a small number of examples, positively stated, of what that expectation looks like. And I'm just going to ask folks very quickly as I keep talking to pop into chat if you've had the experience of doing this with teachers, kind of what some of your learnings were around that. And as you're writing, I'm going to talk. So one of the things I have noticed when we get into the classroom is this feels a little harder to support. And sometimes teachers haven't had this level of thinking or conversation with themselves, their students, the families they serve. And so while we know school-wide the importance of positively stated, I've sometimes found that hard for teachers. So sometimes they start the conversation with everything they don't want to see in their classroom. And so the important piece is we want to set students up to know what the expectations or norms do look like. And I love Stephen's comment about being even more specific about when we say a do now, how do we go into detail with what that looks like and sounds like? Everything can't go in your matrix. So the goal is to sample the range of a few examples. Yeah, and Karen, you're right. Sometimes it's a challenge with being really specific. Sometimes it's a challenge with knowing which examples to include. The framing positively, I think, can be difficult. So I'm sharing that because as you take this back, it seems simple, but you want to build in time for folks to have this intentional conversation initially with themselves to draft and think about it from their perspective. And then even more importantly, to go back and have the conversation with their students about what does it look like and sound like. And in doing that, they can bring the conversation in around what does this look like and sound like in home and community environments. And so we can start to work on making this matrix reflect not just our perspectives as educators, but the classroom community perspective. So we're setting all students up for success. All right, and I'll say again, I'm going to invite you to put questions in chat if there are some, and if I don't get to them right now, we'll have a little bit of time where I can hop into chat as you all move on. I'll also share that we've created resources to help support this. So there is a whole resource that breaks down how to create a classroom teaching matrix. It gives examples of what matrices might look like. It walks, and I just realized I'm clicking into that, which is why I keep going into the hyperlink. The other piece, which I started to mention, is helping folks bridge what school expectations look like to what home and community expectations might look like, and how behaviors should differ across those contexts, and how we might need to help students see and understand those differences. And we might need to be flexible in our thinking about what behaviors should look like and sound like in school. So there's a couple of activities within this field guide that I found particularly helpful. And one is asking folks to do a personal matrix. And the other one is having folks kind of check the expectations and the things that go into a matrix with their own personal experiences and values. So I don't have time to do a deep dive into that right now, but those are, again, for those of you who have been doing this, it's a way to go deeper. Then there is a spot to ask folks to develop a lesson plan, to think about teaching. Let me say it differently, not to think about, to write and plan how they're going to effectively and explicitly teach these expectations or norms with their students. And I say that because sometimes I think the activity of developing the matrix feels like we've had the conversation and kids have learned. But even if we engage students effectively in designing the matrix, there still has to be really explicit instruction to create that universal, robust, differentiated system of support for each and every learner. So even if we have talked about what it means to be kind to ourselves during teacher-directed learning, for example, we still need an explicit lesson plan that goes into greater detail with what it looks like and sounds like, and what it doesn't look like and sounds like, so that students who aren't sure where the line is can learn that line and be set up for success. So part of that lesson asks us to think about how we're going to model what it looks like and engage our students in that model, how we're going to engage all students in activities to provide guided practice or lead them through that work, and then how we're going to watch how they're responding to our instruction as a test for whether they're able to do those skills in context. And the lesson plan also sets up follow-up activities for how we're going to prompt and reinforce and provide corrections when kids make mistakes afterwards. So the lesson plan format is probably not super critical to use this exact template, but if y'all have ways that you've supported educators in lesson plans, just look at some of the critical features of this template and how they might match or need to be added to an existing one y'all have for academic instruction. Okay. The other piece that I've mentioned a couple times is getting kids engaged in this work. And I think for some folks that feels easy and natural and they already have the skill set to do that. And for other folks that might feel like a little bit difficult and not how they're used to doing instruction. And so we actually created a nearly scripted lesson plan so teachers can see an example of what it does sounds like to engage learners in the activity of co-creating expectations. So having them think through how they would engage their students in the conversation about the matrix. And it's written with the idea that it's an elementary educator with elementary students. So the language is maybe more appropriate for younger kids, but you could easily adapt and adjust that for older learners because the content and the critical features is the exact same. The language just needs to elevate a little bit. And I love that you're keeping track of all the links. And I know y'all have also the Google Slides of these. Okay. So the part we spend the least time on in this matrix is engaging folks with academic instruction. And I should mention, Stephen gave me the permission to go 5 minutes past, so I'm not breaking my rules. I'm following the rules because you heard me slow down when I saw that message. So the core features of instruction that are the most beneficial, regardless of age, regardless of content, regardless of so many other factors that we think about when we're teaching kids, the most critical feature is that we have kids actively engaged in their learning and that the learning is relevant for them. So we didn't spend a lot of time in this resource on what it looks like to teach because we can't do that across age, across content, across all the things, but we do highlight the importance of getting kids engaged with high rates of quality opportunities to respond, which I am doing the opposite of at the moment, but high rates of quality opportunities to respond. The other things that we think about for educators is how critical this is, again, with that idea of robust and differentiated support to set each and every kid up for success. And there's a couple resources linked, in part because some folks are seeing social emotional behavioral instruction or support and academic instruction as competing. And so this resource on the right, for those of you who geek out on research citations, just talks about how interrelated those things are and how spending time doing either of them is supportive of the other one. So high quality academic instruction can be supportive of students' social emotional behavioral needs, and students need social emotional behavioral needs supported to engage in high quality academic instruction. So it just makes that case for why we need to do both. It's not an either or, and they should never be seen as competing because they are complementary and both critical to student success. Okay, so super quick OTR. If you had to guess how often teachers are prompting students' social emotional behavioral skills, say per hour, pop into chat what you would guess. 1 time an hour, twice an hour, 20 times an hour, just guess. Based on your observations, based on your time walking around class. And when I'm saying prompts, I mean reminders of what skill we want the student to learn in that context. 25, 30, 20, 10. All right. Those are all like double digits. So I'm going to blow your mind for a second. When we go in and look at typical teacher practice with no intervention, the average is not difficult to calculate because it is 0. So that blew my mind too. What we often see in classrooms, including classrooms that serve learners who need us to be at our best, kids who have greater challenges, is teachers have the best of intentions and we are drawn in so many different directions that we forget to set kids up for success before the first kid makes a mistake. So I'm sharing this because we think prompting happens. Every time I ask this question, we think as educators we're doing it all the time. But what we see in classrooms is teachers wait for the first kid to make a mistake. So what we've started asking teachers to do is think about, and not just think about, write down, plan, and have a self-management strategy for how they're going to be sure that they provide those prompts or reminders in advance, because it sets kids up for success. It can be visuals, it can be verbal, it can be part of a lesson. One of my favorite starting strategies is helping kids be greeted at the door, so we set them up for success from the moment they walk in. But if we don't plan it and have a strategy for doing it, we're going to space it. Last but not least, we want teachers to focus on their feedback. We want them to give high rates of specific positive feedback, and we want them to balance out corrections with those high rates of specific positive feedback. We want corrections to be calm, neutral, business-like, correcting social emotional behavioral mistakes, even big ones, just like we would correct an academic mistake. And so part of the reason we ask teachers to script these is so they can think about short statements that sound authentic to themselves and that meet their kids' needs so that they can plan their use of praise and corrections, because sometimes that's another thing. We're too busy to do it really effectively. So there's other strategies we can give them if they need to go beyond this, but if we had those pieces in place, I'm going to go past this really quickly. If we had those pieces in place, we would set folks up for success. So what I'm going to challenge you to do, I can't actually assign you homework, so you can totally ignore this, but I'm going to challenge you to think about how you would do this if you're still classroom-based for yourself, but especially if you're not classroom-based, how you might help a teacher do this work, and if you have the opportunity to try it with them. And with that, I am exactly on the dot for my 5 extra minutes. So happy to hang out and answer questions, but also happy to be quiet and stop sharing so you all can move on.
All right, we can stop recording so that if anyone asks questions, it can